Hi, my name is Susan Spritz Myers, and I'm going to talk today on intuition. So included in my talk is going to be what is intuition, what are the benefits of it, and how can we increase it. So to start, to get ready for this talk, I went to the dictionary online, and here's what the dictionary says for the definition of intuition. I won't read it to you, but I'm going to tell you my most favorite one is in number 4. So intuition is really deep knowing without evidence or proof. And what I also learned in my studies is that, my limited studies I will say, is I happened to be reading this book which is called All Is Well by Louise Hay, if anybody knows it. She's a medical intuitive. And early in on the book, she actually gives 5 different ways that we experience intuition. It turns out that we experience intuition through our 5 senses. So, for example, somebody might say, oh, this doesn't smell right, it doesn't taste right, they have a gut sense. We all get intuition in very different ways, and they really come through our 5 senses. So I thought that was really fun. I just happened onto it, and it was perfect timing to prepare for this talk. I will pass that book around later if people want to look at it. The other thing I did to prepare for the talk is I recognized I'm a very intuitive person. I trust my intuition for a long time. And as a coach, I know that there's varying levels of how much people trust their intuition. So I thought, well, I'm going to go and interview people, clients, colleagues, sponsors of work that I do, on how do they experience intuition. So I crafted these 3 questions. Has intuition played out in your professional success? If it has, tell me about that. And then the key that I was looking for were examples of how intuition has been successful in business. It seemed like there was a lot of really simple stories about love, but I really wanted to hear in the workplace, how are people using intuition? Because that's something that we don't really talk about, right? It's a little bit taboo as a leader or a manager to reveal that we're listening to our gut. So I specifically started with what I would call more analytical types. People that were less like myself in terms of, I would think of myself as somebody who's very comfortable winging it. Very comfortable listening to my intuition. So I first targeted people that I knew to be very analytical and very process oriented. And I said, oh, this is going to be 15 minutes. So then when I started to talk to those people, I thought, oh my God, I better get more sample from more people who were improvising. So here's some of the things that I heard. So the wingers, as I call them, more the people who really like to shoot from the hip, I was really surprised that even though intuition is a huge part of their process, it was really hard for them to articulate what goes on. And that they completely trust their gut, but they couldn't really separate how it works for them. And that was really intriguing to me. The more analytical types, they definitely have it also, but they're really clear when their intuition happens because it's really different than how they operate. And so that was, it wasn't really top of mind for them. Several of them were really nervous to talk to me, like, oh, I don't have anything to say about it. And then when I got into the conversation, the stories were fabulous. I thought the analytical stories were much more interesting, to tell you the truth, than the wingers. So some of the benefits that I heard, let's start with the business. People feel like they're better readers of other people. Now, some people were talking about body language, and that's a real thing. So there's evidence, right, if you can read body language. What I'm talking about with this intuition is really just knowing it without any facts, without being able to read it, really hearing it, maybe within or experiencing it. People talked about that problem solving was, time frames were shortened. Yes. People talked about that interviews were better. So here's one example, and this was from a winger. He said that he had just done an interview the hour before. He runs a software business. And he was interviewing somebody, and he said, just popped into my head that this person had been fired. So the next, he said, I had no evidence for that. But the next question that I asked was, have you been fired? And she said yes, and then the interview completely changed on that question. And he was so delighted because he thought, in reflection, I learned so much. I actually decided not to hire her, and it wasn't because she was fired, but it was how she viewed the fact that she was fired. So I thought that was really a great example of how intuition was helping him. The next one actually comes from one of my analytical people, an engineer. Very process-oriented, and what he realized, he runs a huge team of engineers, and he just added a whole huge second group of people who he really didn't know. And he recognized that he was putting teams together for projects really using his intuition because he didn't have the data about them. And he was really delighted in that process. So some other people talked about they prevent problems. I think the biggest thing that I heard from everybody is that they value it and they don't use it exclusively. So they'll get a gut sense and then they'll go check it out, is what I heard in the business place. Life, I think people are a little more relaxed about trusting their intuition without having to prove it. So a lot of people said, you know, I have so much greater wisdom. And some of these people that I interviewed were in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they often said, I wish I trusted it at an earlier age. Like, I recognize how important it is, and I wish I had been more open to it. So what I really heard was greater confidence, calmer within. They feel like they're a part of something bigger. A few people talked about a divine connection, but that wasn't really universal. People really, I think they're in awe of it. One other story that I found fabulous that I want to share with you is I had an HR manager who is very analytical, and he was the one who said, oh, I don't have anything to contribute to this conversation. And I said, oh, let's just have it and see what comes up. And he had to look for a job. He was never going to leave. His job was eliminated, as they say. There was a huge organizational change. And he is a very Christian, very serious guy. And he reads this job posting, and it's a national Christian organization, and he literally feels a jolt in his body. And he says, it was very upsetting to me. He said, I knew I was supposed to work there. And I said, well, what upset you? And he said, I had no evidence. I knew nothing about the organization. I didn't know anybody, and I knew I had to have facts. I couldn't make that decision based on a jolt. But I couldn't ignore the jolt. And I know him so well, and it was just a tickle because I thought, oh, I could just see how upsetting that was to him. He goes, I scoured the internet, I found as much information, but I kept coming back to that sense that I felt. And the nice story is he did take the job. He started in January, and he's happy as can be. So I thought, that was like the most fascinating story in somebody who said, I don't have anything to tell you. So that I really loved. Okay, just two last things I want to share with you before I'm done is when not to use intuition. One is if you're going to embarrass yourself or you're going to embarrass others, if it's not appropriate, and if specifics are required. So one teeny story there, several years ago I was coaching somebody and I was standing up to leave, and I heard in my head, they're going to fire him. And I recognized, oh my God, it's intuitive. Where did that come from? I don't know. And don't speak it. Right? And the interesting thing was the next day I called to schedule something for him, and I was told he was fired. So that, I got goosebumps.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
That blew me away, but I knew not to speak it. So the very last point I want to share with you before I finish my talk is how to increase your intuition. And it is really about getting quieter so you can listen within. Here are some fun rituals. You can meditate, you can journal, you can walk in nature. This is not a power walk. It's not talking to your girlfriend. It is about getting quieter. So that is my talk today. My last thing is, if you can practice by deciding which elevator is going to come, right? Use your intuition. That comes from a fabulous book called Psychic Pathways. So that is it on intuition today. Thank you so much for your attention.